Hi there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Cloud-Based Mayhem. Quick bit of housekeeping as we're getting into the holidays. First of all, happy Thanksgiving to those of you in the States. Big one coming up this Thursday. But also wanted to let you all know that I now have the book available on the website. Unfortunately, only to those of you who are in the U.S. Sorry, it's just a shipping thing, and we've got dealers that are tied to Cross Country Magazine all around the world, so it's much better for you to get your book from wherever you're from if you're not in the States. But if you order the book on the website, I think I've got about 40 copies between now and Christmas, and use the coupon code HOLIDAY, I'll give you free shipping, and that'll apply to anything else in your cart. So if you need some Christmas gifts for yourself or for a loved one, head on over to cloudbasedmayhem.com and line that up. Again, the coupon code is HOLIDAY, and it'll be good between now and Christmas, December 25th. My guest today is Kirsty Cameron. I was excited to get an email from a fan of the show and a good friend, Viv Foraker, who connected me with Kirsty. I've been flying with her in the last couple British Opens down in Royal Dania the last few years, so I know Kirsty, but she's had some really cool flights recently, a couple records, and she's been racing paragliders for longer than I realized. Been on the British team, a member of the world's team a number of times, and just has gotten after it. And we talk about a lot of her history and comp flying and difference between two-liners and three-liners, and her recent move down to a Xeno and why, and also how flying has changed for her with the recent addition of a little boy. She's got a 4-year-old, as I do, so we talk a lot about risk and how that shapes how you fly, and how it may change how you fly and how you pursue it, and how it can affect, obviously, relationships, all these things that most of us have to deal with. So I really enjoyed this. We had a blast, and I think there's a little something here for everybody. So enjoy this talk with Kirsty Cameron. Kirsty, I'm so glad that Viv reached out and connected us. I've actually been meaning to get you on the show for ages, and that was just a great reminder. Congratulations to your countryman. That was double gold, with Russ just dominating and showing how skilled he is in very light conditions.
Well, the whole team were good,
Yeah, they're fantastic. And I know you've been on that team many times. So that must have been fun to watch, but also kind of painful to not be there.
Yeah, it was difficult, really. I mean, there's various reasons why I couldn't be there this time, unfortunately. Not least the fact that our 4-year-old, has just started school. So I've got a young family now, so I've got a few other extra responsibilities these days. It was. I've been chatting to Guy a little bit, and both me and Guy have been on the team a few times over the years, and we just so happy for the team, but at the same time, we would love to have been there ourselves as well. So.
Yeah. And like you said, Guy's been on it many times. And so, well, it really looks like the juniors program that the British have set up is paying great results. And I mean, I was proud of them. I'm not even a Brit. They just did really well. It was neat to see Theo flying so well, and Seb and everybody. So
sure. They're all friends as well, aren't they, at the end of the day? So it's just nice. It's just really good to see it happen.
Yeah.
I mean, for Russ, it's fantastic. They've got the double gold. It's just brilliant for the whole team. But at the end of the day, I just so wanted Russ to win.
Yeah, and I mean, he's been second many times. We actually talked about that on the show, that he's, he feels like he's kind of lacked that killer instinct over his career, and just been shy, super final a couple times. And so it was nice to take home the big win.
Definitely. He deserves it. He so does. He's been so gracious in defeat so many times that it's just, yeah. So
couldn't go to a better person or a better pilot. Yeah, that was really terrific to see.
Yeah.
Well, let's start there. It was the flip side for us. The Yanks just got crushed. We had a really hard race. We had quite a few there that had just competed in their first World Cup. With COVID and everything, selection was quite interesting. It was kind of weird this year, which I'm sure it was
Yeah, I
for
saw
many.
that. Yeah, it's a few new names there for sure.
Yeah, which is great. It's
Yeah,
good to give
yeah.
them, the chance at seeing what that's all about. But how have, I talked about this a bit with Robbie, the Brits in the history of free flight, hang gliding and paragliding have just done incredibly well
Mm,
historically. And, you don't come from a place that has great flying, I would say. It has very interesting flying. And there's been some awesome, the North South Cup. And, it's a
mm,
great place to fly, but it doesn't have, consistently banger conditions. And I'm just wondering if
sure.
that's the reason you guys have to chase it so hard, or what it is you think, because like you have been on the team many times,
Mm,
and that game. You flew the R11. You've got a lot of records, which we're going to talk about here shortly. But I'm
mm.
just wondering what you chalk it up to, the British success.
Yeah, I mean, I know it's often put out there that it's because we have to fly in such rubbish conditions, but yeah, we do, I suppose. I mean, I think less that we have to fly in rubbish conditions all the time, more that, interestingly, we don't get, in the UK at least, we don't get a huge number of days each year that are really good days, So we do get those really good days, but they're sort of few and far between, really. So, but yeah, I think we're quite sort of determined, that's for sure, to get out on the really good days and make the most of it. And I suppose we do end up having to fly in, yeah, I say less than, classic conditions, I suppose. So I suppose that, interestingly, personally, I'm not actually that good at flying in really weak conditions. So I
Oh,
should
really?
prefer it when it's quite strong. So I don't think I sort of fit the typical UK XC mode, really, and I've had to sort of train myself over the years to be more patient in UK conditions and slow myself down and not get sort of impatient, really, with the conditions. And when I first started doing competition flying and flying abroad, I went to places like St Andre and absolutely loved it, because there you can definitely fly at more of a pace than you can in the UK. And I really enjoyed that. So yeah, I don't know that it's entirely to do with that. And some of our team, don't even live in the UK currently and fly abroad, and so yeah. So I don't know whether it's purely the fact that we're good in the weak stuff. Certainly we sort of certainly punch above our weight in terms of, you think of the number of UK pilots from quite a small population. We seem to do quite well out of it. So,
Yeah, I mean, in talking to Guy a while back, and I think it was Roldanillo a few years ago, he was talking about the kind of the juniors program. It seems very supportive, and
mm,
it seems like a lot of energy is going into your younger pilots and kind of bringing them up and teaching them the ropes. And uh, here in the States, it's very much more cowboy. Or, if you want to pursue that, you can, but you're on your own. You're not going to get any support from USPA, or it's you have to fund it yourself and time it
mm,
yourself. And I mean,
mm,
I
mm.
think that really showed in Loma Bola, in a sense, the conditions that you often have to fly in. Because I was down there for the World Cup a year ago. I guess that was 2 years ago now, and it's pretty light. And they were certainly had they had a lot of rain this time, a lot of cloud. Didn't sound like it was the opposite of strong, and it was just really patience won the day.
Mm,
And
mm.
kind of hanging back and not leading out much. And like Russ always says, being very disciplined. And it certainly paid off there. And I think the Americans really struggled with that, because they like to go. They like to go
Yeah,
hard.
yeah, yeah, for sure, for
That's
sure.
not the game there.
No, definitely not. Well, certainly not this the last 2 weeks anyway. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, tell me
yeah.
about, you've had some records or something. I don't know much about this. What's happened recently with some big flights?
Yeah, we've had some good flying in the UK this year. It's not been what I would call a classic year in terms of, lots and lots and lots of really good flying days, but the ones that have been good have been really quite good. And we've had some, this year I decided that I wanted to sort of focus on the UK cross country. As I said, got a young family now. What with COVID and everything else going on, I thought this year I'm not going to travel. I'm not going to fly. I'm not going to get into all of the fuss with testing and everything else with COVID. So I thought I'd just stay at home and just go out on the days that are good. I've got a job at the moment that's reasonably sort of flexible around my time, in the sense that I can sort of get days off from work at sort of fairly short notice, which is good to say. So I just thought, I'm just going to throw myself into the UK scene this year and see what I can get done. So more than normal, because like in a typical year, I'm sort of giving out quite a few days of holiday to going abroad to do fly comms. So certainly when I'm doing the Cat ones, it's sort of 2.5 weeks out of my holiday leave, and then if I'm doing a couple of other Cat 2s as well, so that's taking up quite a lot of my leave really. So this year I thought, just pick the good days and take those off and see what I can do. And it's been an interesting year because there's been a sort of a group of us that have sort of got together as a team and sort of focused on the XC, not just in the air, but, in the planning stages, deciding which sites to go to, and very much deciding that we're pretty much prepared to travel anywhere in the UK, just within reason, not necessarily quite up as far as Scotland, although that has happened this year. But more sort of, quite happy to sort of travel sort of 3-4 hours to get across to a good site, which I'm sure for you sounds like really small distances, but it's quite a distance for us to go each day.
Sure.
Yeah. So we've been teaming up with Idris this year. I've been flying a lot with him because he was back in the UK after he'd left Gin, and sort of between looking for another job, he's been out all the time because his dad lives up at the Malvern Hills, which is a small set of hills out to the west of where I live, and takes pretty much any wind direction there. And so we've been going there quite a bit, and then further out into Wales as well. So going back, 3 years, 2018, I think it was, Richard Carter, sort of a renowned UK pilot, especially for cross country. He flew the first 300 kilometres from the site in sort of mid Wales, flying right across England and landing on the east coast. So we went out to a site in May a couple of times to try and replicate that. We managed to do a couple of flights, sort of 250 kilometres in one day.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's crossing the whole island, isn't it?
Pretty much. Certainly if you're doing 300, you definitely are. You're going almost coast to coast. So, yeah. So that
it must be awesome. Is there? Are you dealing with a lot of airspace when you're doing that?
You are.
Yeah.
You are. I mean, that's the other complication in this country. So to do a big distance in this country is quite an achievement because you're dealing with a lot of airspace as well. So,
yeah, you must get good at that. We don't deal with airspace at all here. So whenever I go to the X-Alps, that's the thing I worry about the most. It's just, oh God, the airspace.
I think it helped to the world again this time as well, because the Brits actually sort of, I don't know what word is respect airspace, but, are probably good at sort of actually flying and actually working with the airspace, and not being too much of a distraction, because it is a distraction. And if we've actually got quite good at actually doing our flight and also having to, keep a few brain cells on the airspace as well, because it can really distract you. So
how do you teach the audience, what are your steps to prepare for a flight that has a bunch of airspace? Or, for me, in the X-Alps, I use that side view on Fly Sky High, and that just has been so valuable. Once I learned how to use it, because you can see it. You can see it coming. Okay, well, I've got to be below there or above there. Or, Kriegel talked about it this year that he had to, barely was able to fish through that pretty hard airspace going to Pispalua. Yeah. And if without that side view, that kind of thing's tricky.
I actually try and memorize it.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I will actually, if I know I'm going to do a big flight like that, I will actually, and if it's through an area that I'm less familiar with, I will actually go over that a few times in my head, looking at the screen as well when I'm at home on the laptop, and actually trying to remember roughly, what airspace is going to be coming up. Because typically when we're doing these big flights, these downwind flights, then you're typically doing that on a windy day. So the airspace can come up at you quite quickly.
Sure.
1 minute you're sort of like firming away, and the next minute you're like, oh God, I've got airspace 1 kilometer, downwind of me. And it can get too late, can't it, on the paraglider, because you haven't got that kind of, or certainly you can start to make the flight quite difficult, and it can put you on the ground because all of a sudden you're trying to sort of crosswind in thermals around a piece of airspace, which is a lot more tricky on a paraglider than even if it's on a hang glider. And second, on a sailplane, it's easy. So, so it's best to try and avoid those situations, and be sort of starting to crosswind earlier than you as early as possible, to try and getting up close to the airspace in the first place. Because often it's too late once you're up really close to it. Certainly, it's put me down before now, where I had to try and really, really dramatically crosswind because I've not paid attention to the airspace. Yeah, exactly. So, and in fact, we were doing that on this particular flight from the Ulan Valley, where it was quite funny actually, because we got about probably best part of 100k into that flight, and the first part of that flight was incredibly quick. I think we did the first 100 kilometers in about just over 2 hours, which is pretty fast.
Yeah, and that's fast. 50k an hour average is moving.
There's a group of sort of 5 or 6 of us working it, and we kind of thought that we'd be able to possibly break 300k that day. We really did at that kind of speed initially. Unfortunately, it then slowed up, and we had a section where there was a lot of sort of decayed cloud streets, really, and all they would do, they were almost providing lift, but not quite, sort of just zeros underneath them, and then the whole lot was in shadow below on the ground. So eventually started dropping through that, and then we ended up scrabbling around in the shadow trying to find climbs for a while, which was definitely one of the cruxes of that flight. And then it all switched back on again, and then we got out into an area called the Cambridge Flats, which is, as I say, just completely flatlands, and that area works really well. And you get out into that area, and it's kind of like game on again. There's sailplanes everywhere, and getting much better climbs again. So that really helped that day. But what I was going to say was, so about 100k into that flight, we're on radio, and everyone's mapping was dropping out. I think Joe had lost all of his screen entirely. Guy didn't know where he was, which is typical Guy. I think he was having problems as well. And they were literally, the way the guy described it, the waiting guy was a bit behind at this point. They were waiting for me to catch up. And they're, come on, the map needs to catch up. You need to wait for the map, because I still have my mapping working. And they knew they were coming up to sort of the Birmingham airspace, so it was going to be a bit more sort of dodgy. And Guy's coming on going, Kirsty, where are we now? What's the airspace? So it's just a bit ridiculous, really. But yeah, so that showed really that if no one's got mapping, all of a sudden you're completely blind, and it's dangerous. So yeah, it's quite funny. Yeah, it's a good flight. And then later in that flight, I think we dropped Joe, and then it was down to me, Guy, and another guy called Tom, and another guy called Dougie, and both of them were on PBs by the time we got to 190k, I think.
Wow!
And they both went over 200k for the first time as well, and it was a PB for me that day as well. So it was a good day out.
Yeah, that's a great day out. And what were you flying? Were you on the Enzo?
I was on the Zeno. So I've been on the Zeno now for the last 2-3 years. So
I was going to say, you've got, like me, you've got a 4-year-old. We both have 4-year-olds. Is that is that a kid decision, or is that a hours decision, or just you're not getting the time? You flew the R11 for a long time, and you're obviously comfortable in 200.
I went on to an R11 in 2011 when that glider came out. And of course, it was then banned the same year. And then I ended up on an NZO1, and then an NZO2, an NZO2 for 4 years as well. So the best part of 7 or 8 years, I was on those high-end gliders. And kind of a crux point, I suppose this often happens with pilots when they step down. I had an incident in San Andre on the NZO2. Noah was, 7 months old, and it's the only time I've ever thrown my reserve. I was at quite high, about 2,200 meters at the start gate, about less than a minute to go to the start. And it was pretty rowdy up there. Have you flown San Andre?
I've flown there, but back when I was really early, and we've kind of skimmed through there on a couple of the X Alps, not really, but I I had kind of an eventful flight there when there was. I've never flown a comp or anything there. Let's put it that way. But yeah, I mean, I know it can
Mm.
get rowdy.
Yeah, I mean, I probably flown more comps there than anywhere else I've flown competitions. I've flown probably 6, 7, 8 comps there
Wow.
over the years because the Brits has been there a lot, and it's
sure.
very easy for us to get to, and we can jump on EasyJet and be down in Nice in sort of 2 hours. So, yeah, it's the favourite venue for the British to go to. We haven't been for a while, but it's But and historically, I've loved it there. I was saying at the beginning of the chat that the first time I flew there, I just loved the place because I always feel it's a bit like if God designed a paragliding venue, it would be St. Andre. It's kind of like a skate park for paragliding, where like a skate park, they've got all the ramps in the right places and all that. And you go to St. Andre, and it's just like ridge after ridge after ridge, and you can fly. They can set tasks in virtually any direction, So
I hear a lot about from that there's a lot of really full bar racing right on the terrain that it sounds like, especially first timers when they go there are always a little bit like, I mean, and if you don't do that, you're going to lose the gaggle. You got to do it. And it sounds like it can be a little spicy.
Yeah, there is a degree of doing that. I think on the good days, less so. I think on the good days, you can get off the train a bit more. Certainly there's what I call sort of get out of jail free cards in St. Andre. If you get a little bit behind, you can just point at a ridge and you'll get there, and there'll be a 6-meter climb on the ridge every single time.
Right.
If you have to wait a few seconds, something will come through. So certainly in the early days, I quite like that because, you typically be on a lower aspect wing and get a bit behind and you just go to that ridge and then boom, out goes the climb every time, So,
right.
And it's big climbs there. I mean, I think that the time when St. Andre doesn't work is if it's windy. If it's windy, it's very thermic, and if it's windy as well, it just becomes a bit of a washing machine. But assuming they're tasking on decent days when it's not too windy, then it's good solid climbs there. They're strong climbs, but they're not tiny little course, they're good solid climbs. So I think it's a good place to fly.
Yeah.
But anyway, I was going to say, so there I am at the start gate, 30 seconds to go. It was particularly rowdy that year. This is going back 2 or 3 years, and it's been very dry there all season. And we tend to fly there towards the end of the season because in July, August, it's just too windy and too strong. Anyway, it was particularly punchy this year, and I'm up there on the Enzo, 30 seconds to go, and the wing just went just complete. I think I was a little bit tight. That classic thing.
Yep.
It was pretty rowdy up there.
Yep.
And and this is the thing that's coming out from SIV a lot. That you just
a little too stiff, a little too overreactive.
Just a little bit too overreactive, a little bit tight, and I knew that it was bumpy. It felt pretty horrendous up there, to speak, and it just went on me completely. And I think I just held it back just for a split second too long. And then it just went bang down in front of me, like literally nose down. This is all over the course, the whole, it's like when these gliders, it sounds like that's in slow motion, but this is all happening over the course of probably less than a second.
Sure.
And the glider's down below me, and then it went straight into like a pretty tight auto rotation. And it's the first and only time when I was like, this glider's, it was just completely spontaneous. I just threw the reserve. There wasn't even any kind of conscious
right. Yeah, time
thought
to throw
about it. It was just reserve was just out instantly. I just knew it was beyond my control, I guess, completely. So the reserve out it came, and I was high, and I drifted for a long way, and I came down. The main reinflated, and I think this is something that's not getting discussed too much with these high-end wings. Is when the thing reinflates. It started downplaning, basically.
Yeah, sure.
So I've got the thing in front of me, pulling me down, and it's horrendous. And I thought it was going to end worse than it did, to be honest. And luckily I came down hard, but not too hard. I didn't break anything or anything. But that was a bit kind of like, okay.
Just a little wake-up call.
Just a little wake-up call, and I just, And then I wanted to fly the rest of the comp, and Pepe was there. Pepe Malecki was there, and he had his Xeno with him. So this is now when the Xeno had just come out, really. So this is 2018, and he said I could borrow that for the rest of the comp if I wanted to. And I thought, yeah, I'd like to fly one anyway and see what it's like. So I flew that for the rest of the comp, and I just loved it. I just loved that. So I decided to buy one, and that's what I've been flying for the last few years. So for sure, that incident was definitely a kickstart towards me stepping down slightly, I think, really. And I just really like flying the wing. It's just a bit easier to fly. It's a bit easier on the ground. I like the fact it's easier on the ground. I mean,
sure.
It's always the case with wings, isn't it? How they behave on the ground is going to be a real good indicator of how it behaves in the air.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's just a lovely cohesive wing on the ground, and that very much translates to how it flies in the air as well. So
yeah, and it's proven itself over the years as well. I mean, when we saw a ton of people jump onto it, I think the initial thought was, these folks don't have the hours to fly a two-liner, but it's really, it doesn't seem to surprise. I mean, it's still paragliding. There's still accidents, of course, on every wing, but it seems to be quite a gentle if people move to that from a three-liner, it seems to be quite a nice move for most people.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, as you say, you still have to give these wings respect, and it's still a relatively high-performance wing, for sure. But it's definitely a little bit more benign when it does go, for sure.
Yeah, a little bit easier to get back than an Enzo.
Yeah, I think so. I've touched wood, I've not had any. I hardly ever collapse it, to be honest. It's only not in the UK flying.
Right.
But that's something nice about UK flying. You don't really get many collapses.
Right. Yeah.
It's only not in thermal flying. No, it's a good wing. It's a very good wing. I mean, it's often the case, as you say, people jump onto these wings because they're the new thing, and often when they're initially reviewed, everyone says, it's the best thing since sliced bread, and typically it's about a year later you start getting the stories, don't you, about people saying, actually, maybe it's not quite so good. But I think, generally speaking, I don't think anyone's really sort of come back and said that the Xeno is a bad wing at all. Really, it's classic.
Yeah, it's kind of held up over time for sure. Like the Enzo 3, it's been out for a while now, and it's still, people are still loving it.
Yeah, I was saying to Russ that he needs to get back from Argentina and get the Xeno 2 certified. That's his priority.
Yeah, they it's coming. Yeah, okay. I'd love to hear more about your son and being a mom and flying, because that's not a topic we've discussed with too many moms on the show. And because I'm asked that all the time, and what's changed with your risk tolerance and how you approach the sport. And I'd love to just hear if there's been a shift.
There has been. I mean, I suppose I should say there's been a shift because I don't want to take risks and all of that kind of stuff. But if I'm brutally honest, that's not the main reason, to be honest. The main reason is around, I suppose there is a risk element, and that stems from the fact that I'm flying less hours. Definitely flying
just
less
don't have
hours.
the currency that you did.
Yeah. And I think that I'm sort of taking more risk. I'd be taking more risk if I was flying an Enzo all the time, certainly abroad, in bigger air and so on. Because I do think these wings are a little bit exponential in the way they behave, I think I'd be fine flying an Enzo 3 in the UK. I didn't think that'd be a problem at all. But I think when you take wings into bigger air, they ramp up quicker on the higher end wings. That's my experience of it anyway. Things get amplified quicker in bigger air on these high end wings. So I think given the number of hours I'm doing, it's just a bit safer, and it's a bit more relaxed really as well, to be flying slightly lower spec wing, but still with enough performance to generally cut it. I mean, I noticed in sort of Cat 2s, like flying in the Brits, for example, that being on a Xeno is not really too much of a disadvantage. But you go to PwC or you go to a Cat 1 and you're at a major disadvantage being on a Xeno. You really are. I noticed that in the last Worlds I did was in Macedonia, which was phenomenal competition. We did 10 out of 10 tasks. there was two things going on there. One, I wasn't particularly race fit, really. I'd only done a couple of comps that year before I went to Macedonia in August, which didn't help. I think by the end of the second week, I was just about race fit.
Right.
Really.
Just warming up at the end.
Yeah, genuinely, really, I think. So there was that going on, and also you just lose out. On the longer glides and stuff, you're just at a disadvantage on the Xeno compared to being on the Enzo. For sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think you see it. You see that when we had Chelan this year, it was pretty hard. On the downwind tasks, the Alpinas would be right with us. You don't really see these huge jumps until you're flying triangles and there's no wind. When there's
exactly,
or you're flying triangles and you're going to wind, then it's really okay. And that's where you really start noticing. I think it's mostly Nick Reese said it once that I really appreciated this, that you just have more options on it gives you, you have to be a much better pilot if you're flying a lower end wing to keep up, because you're going to come in 100 meters higher, 200 meters high every time. And you just have more time to fiddle around to find that sweet spot whereas,
I'll come back to that in a minute, actually, in relation to the UK season this year, flying with Idris, because it was quite interesting. But just sticking to the question you asked me about being a mum and everything, I think, So that's I think that's the main reason for sort of stepping down in terms of wing, is because I'm just not doing the hours really to sort of justify flying that level of wing. And yes, you then do come unstuck when you get to the big comps. For the most part, I think just being on a slightly lower spec wing is the way to be at the moment, really, to be honest. But yeah, still able to go out on a big cross-country day or go to a Cat 2 competition and sort of hold my own. I wouldn't want to be on anything less than the likes of Xeno, really, because then you really are in a different world, really. So yeah, nothing's really changed massively, other than the fact that I have less time to commit to the selfish sport that is paragliding.
Yeah.
Because it is quite a selfish sport at the end of the day.
It's quite time consuming, isn't it?
It's time consuming, and it's not a particularly exciting sport for the family. I mean, Noah likes coming out and watching me fly on the hill and so on and so forth. But once I'm up and in the air, then
there goes mom. We'll see her for dinner, maybe.
Yeah, quite exactly. So it's like, quite selfish in that respect as well, really. So, yeah.
Has that been more? Is this something you struggled with in the sport before you had your son?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think even in and around a relationship as well. It's and even with friends, relationship with friends and stuff. I mean, for UK flying, you have to be able to say, you have to keep your options open in the summer. You have to be able to not make any commitments to anybody about anything.
Right.
Because, if it's a really good flying day, you need to be able to go flying. And if you did make a commitment to someone and then you're with them, it sounds awfully selfish to say it, but you're looking at the sky and you're not really focusing on what you're doing because, you're out for a meal or something or with some friends and in a park or something, and you're just looking at the sky going, I just want to be flying. I just want to be flying. I don't, which is an awful way to be to people, really. So I have always struggled with that, over the years. And I know it has cost me, probably some friendships and stuff over time. Not because I've fallen out with people, but just because I don't see them enough,
Yeah, sure. I mean, eventually, I'm not going to invest a lot of time in Kirsty. Yeah. She's just going to go paragliding.
Exactly.
I've also struggled with this, especially lately, more so than before. And I don't think that has as much, maybe it does, and with my daughter, but I have wondered this, that it doesn't, and this might be totally erroneous, but I'd like to get your thoughts on it. But I've often thought that doesn't strike the Swiss and the French and maybe Germans as much as it does us. And let me explain that. I think because it's really seen as a very legitimate undertaking. This is, for the French, and, you can make money doing it. This can be your job. And I've often found that, like when we go through the fundraising aspect of the X Alps, I just can't stand it. I can't stand asking people for money to send me paragliding. It just doesn't seem right. Even though when you ask those people, they say, well, it's incredibly inspiring and I love watching it and it's awesome. And, I think this is a real personal issue that I need to get over. But what do you think about that? I mean, if you're Maxime Pinot, this is your job. This is what you do. It's legitimate. Charles Cazot, this is what you do.
Yes. I mean, there is a very different setup for them, isn't it? I mean, I can relate to that with UK flying in other ways as well, because I think, aside from family and all of that, but in terms of us having access to sites in the UK, it's all private land ownership. You have to sort of almost beg farmers to allow you to fly on their sites, and some do begrudgingly, others will kick you off if, the slightest thing happens with some paraglider landing in the slightly the wrong place, all that kind of stuff. So I do feel that we're very much begrudgingly accepted as some kind of wacky sport in the UK. Whereas, you go to France and it's literally, you've got, members of the French cabinet who fly paragliders, so it's a very much a different demographic, isn't it? And a very much a different sort of level, as you say, level of acceptance, and it's much more integrated into the culture almost than it is. Because I think that, how many people fly paragliders in the States? Relative to the
I've heard the same
side.
thing since I started almost 20 years ago, and now it's about 6,000. Yeah, I mean, that's just
6,000.
Yeah, I mean, they say you can with the hang gliding and paragliding, it's 10, but I've heard a lot of people say, yeah, but that really depends on how you count. Are they just renewing their license and never even flying? But the number I hear a lot is 6,000. I mean, it's pathetic. That's
just a drop in the ocean. Yeah,
it's literally. I mean, most people, even in a place that has flying, if you say that you're a paraglider, they say, "Oh yeah, I've done that in Cancun, behind a boat." They're talking about parasailing. They literally don't know what it is. So it's just not. You don't even see it like you do in the Alps. It's definitely not considered. If I told somebody this is what I do for a living, which I don't, but I mean, if I did, they would go, "What? This is a job?"
It is interesting actually, because I almost sometimes feel, sounds stupid to say it, such a British thing. I think that my partner Emma sometimes, she said, tell them that you fly. You meet someone new. I said, tell them you fly paraglide. It's really interesting, And it's like I often sort of hold back and don't want to, because I just. Often I think people think you're a complete loon if you tell them that you paraglide. It's interesting actually. This year I went to a local site. There's a site quite close to me, so I can get out to flying sites in about my nearest sites, or just under an hour. I can get to other sites in sort of local sites in sort of an hour and 20 minutes, that kind of thing. It's pretty close. But I've got one site that's sort of literally 40 minutes away. I don't fly it very often because it's kind of under airspace for Heathrow. Not right under the airspace. You can fly up to sort of 2,500 feet. But there's much better sites you can go. You can't fly any distance from it because the direction downwind just takes you straight towards Heathrow and London, so you can't go anywhere. But it's quite an interesting little site, and there's a particular little flight I'd always wanted to do from there, which you sort of fly down the ridge for a few kilometres and back, and it's just a really nice scenic flight. And I never had the conditions there to do it, and this year I finally managed to do it in really good conditions. It was great fun. No distance involved, no records, nothing like that. But it was just a really fabulous flight. Anyway, the day I arrived at the site, I literally walked onto it's like a little opening in the trees where you take off. There's a couple of benches there. It's in the middle of summer, and it's in the evening. But there was like a couple of groups of people up there, and there was this guy sat on the bench with some other friends or family, and he says, "You're not gonna jump off of there now, are you? You're not gonna go and jump off of there." And I was like, "Yeah." I mean, and it just like there was no interest at all. It was just like, you're a nutter, and you're about to go and kill yourself. And anyway, so I just thought, I'm so rigged up and everything, and I had a perfect takeoff, and I took off, and I went straight out to $2.5 grand in fantastic conditions. And I just thought, oh, well, hopefully you might see it in a slightly different light now that done that, but probably not.
Probably not. You're still a complete nutter, which I guess we
Yeah.
all are to some extent. So you just gave away. My next question was going to be, where are you from? Where do you live in the UK? It sounds like you're in the south, down by London. And how did you get into this? What was the catalyst?
Yeah. So years ago, my uncle used to fly hang gliders. So we used to go out onto the hill and watch him. I mean, not every day. He didn't live part of the country, but when we visit and stuff like that, sometimes we go out and watch him fly. So that was my first sort of introduction to it, and that really got me interested. And so when I was obviously a lot older, I was able to actually have a go. I had a little go at hang gliding, and then got into paragliding. So and now I live down south. I'm originally from the south, but I lived in Wales for a while. But I've been living down south now again for the last sort of 20 odd years. And we live kind of, sort of 20 miles west of London. So just outside Greater London. And I can get out to sites sort of west of here, north of here. So I can go into Wales as well reasonably easily, not too huge a distance. So there's a lot of flying sites, but they're all, I mean, I'm sure compared to what you're used to, they're tiny. The sites down south are tiny. But all you need is somewhere where you can get off and find a climb. And once you're up in a thermal, you're up in a thermal. The site doesn't matter anymore in that sense. So we sort of tend to call them sort of little launch pads, really. There's a site we flew this year, which is kind of just north of London, going up towards a place called Luton, there's another airport there, another London airport. And this site is under airspace where you take off. It's 3,500 feet. But then you fly west from there. It's an easterly launch, and eventually you end up with less airspace restriction. And it's not a site that gets flown that often, and it really is literally a launch pad. And in fact, you'd be amazed if you went there. I mean, even British pilots are amazed when you go there, because you take off in pretty much a flat field. And I genuinely mean pretty much flat field. Wow. It's got a very, very slight slope to it. You can't saw the bit where you take off, and you just flop into this. You literally have to put your feet up, go over a couple of bushes, and flop into this tiny bowl. And again, I'm genuinely not joking. If you flew you could fly to the bottom in about 10 seconds.
Oh my gosh!
And but at the back of this small bowl is kind of like some huge beech trees, which kind of almost double the height of the hill, really. So I think the thermals literally hit these trees. And people have done over 200 kilometers.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
We wouldn't even look at that as a place.
Yeah.
I mean, we're always talking about, well, you don't have that much room to work. Yeah. With 2,000 feet, you're talking about,
yeah,
you've got less than the treetops.
Yeah. I mean, literally, yeah. I think the whole height of the hill is probably sort of three or four tree height.
I guess this is why the Brits are so good at, low saves. You're not even low. For us, oh my God, right on the deck. And for you, we're way above launch height. This is nothing.
Well, that's right. I mean, one of the sort of things that gets said is when you take off from a British hill, your first climb out is your first low save of the day.
Oh, that's great. So you said your uncle was a hang glider, and he kind of got you into it. How long ago was that? How long have you been flying?
So I've been flying. I kind of learned sort of at the end of the 90s, but I've kind of been sort of properly into it from about 2005, 2006. I did my first comp out in Lorania, which is not too far from St Andre.
Yeah.
When they first sort of started the Ozone Chabre Open out in France, I think it was the second year that had been run, or the third year in 2006. That was my first comp, and haven't looked back from there really. So that was that comp, and I think I finished top woman in that comp. And out of all of the back in the days of DHV 1-2, I was second in the DHV 1-2 class in that comp, and that was most of the gliders really.
And you were
so
hooked.
That was So that was like, oh, okay, not too bad, not too shabby. So the following year, I did the Brits first time. I did a competition in an open in Pietrahita, and then an open in St Andre in 2007. So sort of about 15, 16 years now that I've been going at it.
And have comps been the most? Has most of your focus gone into comps? Sounds like lately it's been more kind of, distance and kind of fun stuff, and you've got a nice group of people there you can go,
Yeah.
hunt down big distance with it. But
Yeah.
is most of your time been comps?
About half and half, to be honest.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've always done quite a bit. I've always tried to do a reasonable amount of XC. Never had the chance like I had this year to really just focus just on the XC. I've always, just done a reasonable amount of XC each year. But yeah, I mean, a lot more comps than I'm doing at the moment, for sure. Yeah. Normally most years, for a good 7 or 8 years, I've been doing at least one Cat 1 each year and doing at least 2 or 3 other comps as well. So.
When you look back at those, 15 years of flying comps, was there any kind of aha moment, breakthrough moment where, like Russ talks about discipline, has there been any kind of a mantra or something that's really clicked for you in those years where you've gone, okay, I've got this at least somewhat figured out?
Well, sort of like the opposite of that, I was going to say, the very first time I did the Brits in Pietrahita, I did terribly. I mean, absolutely. As a proper kind of, what's the word? It kind of toughened me up, I suppose, because it was a real leveler.
Just took your ego and shook it around and stomped it on the ground and walked away.
I was in tears by the end of that competition because, like I say, the year before I'd done quite well in this entry-level competition. I've been doing some quite good distance flying as well, And I think the beginning of that year, I'd gone out to Australia. I was on a project which had overrun, and they kept telling me when I'm going to take my leave. And then the next minute they were saying, well, you need to do all this work. So I made a bargain with them that if I finish this project, can I just take all of my leave in one go? So I took 6 weeks of leave and just went out to Australia and just literally went down the eastern seaboard doing loads and loads of flying. I went to Manila and did my first 100K and just, had a great time with all of that. And then I came back and I went off to this competition in Pietrahita in the summer and thought I was reasonably okay, I suppose. And I literally just bombed every single day. I just couldn't get the measure of the place. It's a particular type of place to fly. It's Pietrahita anyway. And just by the end of it, literally, and of course, it's a place for doing quite big distance as well. So you get all these pilots. I'd be back at the bar, at like 1 PM,
and they're just getting going
back to like 9 PM or something, and they all come back. They'd all flown 150K across as well, and it was just very demoralising.
Do you think some of that was when you look back at that? Do you think some of that was expectations? I mean, was it that you literally went in thinking, I think I can do pretty well here, and you just didn't have your eyes wide open?
Yeah, I think so. I think I certainly wasn't aware of. I think there would have been a reasonable degree of trying to chase pilots going on then, and I was obviously on a lower aspect wing anyway. So I think there was a certain case of trying to sort of keep up with the Joneses, I think, and just failing, and then falling out the bottom of climbs, and then being stuck on a ridge, or all that kind of stuff. So I think that didn't help at all. But I sort of picked myself up from that and went to San Andre. And as I said earlier on, really enjoyed it there, had a much better time. So that was an early lesson in how to sort of control, delete, reset yourself and carry on. And then
can we, before you leave that, can you dig into that a little bit more? Because I think that's something most have experienced. I had a similar thing where I had some real beginner's luck and thought, wow, I actually know what I'm doing here. And then I learned I really didn't. And my ego just got floored. And it's also not that fun. It kind of sucks going to a comp and sucking. It's pretty hard. It's just like, God, I got to do this again. And there I go again. I suck. And so,
Russ actually said that it was one of the sort of traits in me that he really likes is the fact that I have over the years been prepared to sort of pick myself back up and carry on, because it does wreck certain pilots. Some pilots just can't deal with that, and they'll be an up and coming, they'll be a good pilot, in terms of their actual flying. But when it comes into like a competitive environment, they just can't handle it, if they're not winning, so to speak. And at the end of the day, only one person wins and everyone else loses. So,
there's a lot of losers in our sport.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you think about the worlds, you've got 150 pilots there and Russ won, and, you've got people that are way down in that competition, but they're there and they're competing, and they're helping make that competition what it is ultimately. So
Mm.
yeah, but you do have to have a certain, like any sport, isn't it? It's mental, really. But once you get to a certain level with your flying in itself, in terms of your skill, the rest of it is just a head game, really. So I think you have to, you've got to learn to deal with defeat. You have to learn to deal with defeat in competitions to progress, really, because you will fail to start with, So you learn from that. Yeah.
Have you kind of identified any type of mental place? I'm not articulating this very well, but a headspace, a particular headspace you try to take into a comp. So you're, let's imagine it's February. You're getting ready to leave the UK to go down to the Brits and roll the Neo or the World Cup or whatever. You pick it. And is there some kind of a place you try to get to before you arrive?
I think so. I think it's to try and be humble about the situation, actually, to realize that at the end of the day, you're just doing, a leisure activity that most people never even get on a paraglider, let alone start playing competitions and so on and so forth, So I try and sort of, certainly if I've had a bad day, that's the kind of place I'll take myself to, And I've always enjoyed the comps for the sort of the buzz of being with other people, being in a different country. There's so much in there to take from a competition. And as much as if you're trying to be competitive, you have to try and keep a competitive edge. And it's not just about being on a leisure holiday. But I think on the days when I've done badly, then that evening I'll just sort of meet up with the guys and have a chat and have something to drink, have something to eat, enjoy where I'm at. Like somewhere like when you're out in Northern Neo, it's just a great place to just hang out, isn't it? So I just try and just sort of go into that kind of a space really, and just be thankful for things that I do have. That definitely helps me get to a better place rather than being upset and cross about the fact that I've had a bad day, because at the end of the day it doesn't really matter, does it?
Yeah.
It really doesn't.
It really doesn't.
Yeah. And I think that's something I did talk recently to my local club, and I wanted to touch on it more, but I'll get some time constraints. But the whole thing about the red mist, really, in flying, especially in competition flying, and like if you're playing a game of tennis and you're getting uptight because you're losing, and it means you hit a few bad balls and the ball goes out the court. That's not going to kill you. Whereas in paragliding, it could kill you, literally, And I think you've noticed this in cross-country flying as well, because I'm jumping around a bit now, but like on big flights, people see that you've done a big flight and everything, and they think, oh, I bet that was lovely. You're up at 5,000 feet the whole day, cruising along. It's not like that at all. You always get low moments in a big flight, maybe one, maybe two, maybe three, where you've got to get a low save somewhere. You've got to dig deep. And it's that whole sort of thing about how deep do you dig before, you might literally be, it sounds melodramatic to say it, but literally digging your own grave, because you get it wrong on a paraglider, it can unravel alarmingly quickly. I think that's something I've learned over the years as well. You can be in a really good place, can't you, with your flying? And literally within, a few seconds, you can put yourself in a really bad place if you're not careful. And that has caught me out. And I've had a couple of instances over the years where I have actually hurt myself because I've allowed myself to get too stubborn, too determined. Russell said to me, "Oh, you're good because you're stubborn and you're determined. You don't give up. That thing of not giving up." But there is a certain point where you have to give up, because if you don't, you're probably going to hurt yourself. How did I get onto that? I can't remember.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it's certainly a topic that comes up a lot too. Is it that I think it's a funny thing to try to not teach, but just I always worry about people getting into the sport, because I remember that time. And,
Yeah.
it's one of these weird ones where, like any sport, you name it, you have to make mistakes to get good.
Yes.
But our mistakes hurt. And,
Yes.
uh, yeah, and I mean,
Yes.
I don't know if you saw, I just did this article for XC Mag about why this was my last X Alps, and it
Mm.
really totally, I mean, there's a lot of reasons, but
Yeah.
the time and the commitment and the money and all those things. But
Sure.
the big one is just that you can't compete. You can't be even remotely competitive in that race unless you're constantly pushing way farther than you ever should.
Yeah.
These are not things that we're normally doing. I don't even think
No.
the people that are winning are normally doing that. Just going out,
No.
it would be
Yeah.
terrifying, and it would be
Yeah.
wrong.
Yeah.
You can't do
Yeah.
that all the time.
No. No.
And it's yeah, you I think it's a good thing every once in a while to pull back and get some perspective on that. Tell me about some of
Yeah.
the accidents you've had. You talked about your reserve
Yeah.
toss in Saint Andre, but I don't know
Yeah.
what happened
No,
in the other ones.
I've had a few accidents over the years, and they've all been in competitions, save one.
Oh wow, okay,
And I think they've all been in competitions because of that doggedness, and that not wanting to give up, not prepared to admit defeat,
yeah,
and a couple of them have ended up hurting me, So I had I had one incident. Well, I had an incident very, very early on, which was nothing to do with competitions. I had a towing accident actually, which could have easily killed me, and I fractured my back. In that one, I had a crush fracture, where I basically had the wing up with knots in my lines, and
yeah,
went up. I was doing a conversion course at the time, and the glider collapsed on me. Very fortunately, the operator guillotined the line, which I'm sure helped save my life.
yeah.
And I came right down rather too quickly and was marched off to hospital that day. So that was not good. All the others have been in competition. I've had two major incidents. One was in Portugal, Montagus, and we were these classic examples where you look back at it and with the hindsight of all the things going on that launch, it's like it's easy to see what was happening. But we had gusties and backwind and all of those kind of things going on the launch, so it was obvious that there was things to be aware of that day. And I took off and turned right along the ridge. We've been told not to fly too far along this ridge. You can fly along into like a little bowl and come back. And I went along this ridge and I was sinking out, and I just went through a really, really horrible bit of lift, which I flew through, okay? At which point I probably should have turned out and gone out into the valley, but people were sinking out really badly in the valley. So I made the wrong decision, as it turns out, to fly back along the ridge again, at sort of at ridge height or just below ridge height. And I connected either with the same piece of air or another piece of air, which completely did a piece of involuntary SIV on the glider. So on the Enzo 1, and apparently it looked like I had literally done SIV at ridge height on the glider from what people said. And it went into, I caught it, but then it went into twists. So I ended up with 3 or 4 twists on the glider, and I'm now descending. And I managed to land on a crash onto a very, very steep part of the hill, and got away with it. I didn't actually break anything.
Oh, so you were trying to just you were like, okay, I'm beyond the possibility of a reserve. I'm just going to try to pilot this in.
Yeah, I was so low.
Okay.
I mean, I was so low. All I had the wherefore, it's like I'd been punched. It was that bad an instant. So by the time I'd sort of mentally come around from being punched, I was like literally about sort of 40 foot off the ground. And before the next thing would have been to go to reserve, but the ground's now coming up so quickly. I just buried what I had left in my brakes and just hit the ground, basically.
Oof.
So that was an incident which could have been avoided if I'd been more reflective about what was going on the side, because I imagine I flew for a dusty, probably.
Yeah.
That's probably what happened. So I should have been more aware of that, and I should have just flown out into the valley and taken my chances with all the other gliders that were sinking out.
Right.
And I think most of those gliders got apple course from out in the valley, so that's what I should have done.
Sure. And like you said, at the end of the
Yeah.
day, who cares? You know?
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. So there was that incident, and then the most serious incident I had was in the wilds in Rwanda in 2015. So we're going into the last task, and I was lying second place female in the comp behind Seiko. So I was in a very good position after 2 weeks of very competitive flying. And I absolutely loved it. It was the first time I'd flown in Rwanda. And I took off, and I had a knot in my upper knots in my upper brake cascade. And it meant that every time I tried the glider was flyable. I didn't really have too much problem with roll control, but every time I tried to fly on full bar, I'd get a collapse on that side of the wing. So I couldn't basically fly full bar. And even flying on half bar, I was having to sort of weight shift to try and keep the glider straight. So it wasn't great. And in a normal situation, you just go and land. You just go and land. But, classic situation, I'm in a good position in the competition. I didn't want to have to go and land because of this. I hadn't, the thing with that situation is I'd actually flown away from takeoff by quite some distance before I even noticed there was a problem, because I hadn't gone on bar, of course.
Right.
I was thermaling, and
sure.
I got sort of at the start gate. The start gates typically they're way away from launch as well. They were in that competition. So I was like 3-4K away from launch before I'd even noticed the situation. Now I've got 20 minutes before the start, and then the start came up and off I went. Of course, and I started going on bar for the first time and I noticed this problem. So I carried on racing basically, and I ended up getting further and further behind because I couldn't properly be competitive on bar basically. And then I ended up further and further back on the task, and then I ended up in a sort of scrubby area off to the east, slightly off track now because I was trying to work route climbs. And again, I wasn't really focusing on the day because the day was actually switching off. No one actually made goal on that particular task in the last day, not a single pilot. But of course, all I was thinking about was my position and the fact that I was miles behind in this task, not properly taking account of the fact that the sky had changed and the conditions weren't great anyway. And if I'd been thinking about that, I probably would have realized that, maybe pilots wouldn't have got to go. And of course, I'm trying to stay up in this low scrubby area, and I came onto a ridge, and I'll never know quite what happened this day, but I was crabbing along this small ridge, about to land on it, so the day had switched off, and the glider just went on me completely. Don't know what happened, and I landed on my back and fractured my back. And I'd imagine it was to do with the configuration of the lines and everything. There was a knot in there, maybe. Don't know. No one else was there, so that day didn't end well either. And again, another example of shouldn't have been doing it really.
Kirsty, have you had any those incidents, or in San Andre, has there been any kind of fear injury that's gone with any of those? Has there been any kind of? Because I know that we often talk about that it's not so scary if you totally know what happened. If you can kind of relive it through your brain, and you were in flow, and I saw it all happened really in slow motion versus what the hell just happened? What happened there? It sounds like that second one was, or that one you just discussed was kind of like
definitely.
that.
The one in Rhoda, I don't really know what happened. And like I say, all I can really put it down to is there was the fact that the glider wasn't in its proper configuration. That's what caused that to happen, but I don't actually know, and no one else was there. And when it actually occurred, I was only sort of 20 feet off the ground anyway. So yeah, I don't know. I suppose instances like that should have changed me. But if I'm brutally honest, it hasn't. None of them have made me think I should stop paragliding.
Right.
And when you sort of dwell on that, you kind of think I must be a nutter. Really, because seriously, because I think a lot of people in a lot of walks of life, they think paragliding is completely bonkers in of itself. They wouldn't even think of going up in a paraglider.
Sure.
They're like the guy on the hill that day, telling me I'm mad, and yet I'm quite prepared to carry on flying, even though these things have happened to me, which I don't know. It either shows I'm mad, or it shows that the sport is just so utterly addictive and such a compelling thing to do that trumps everything else, and I think that's probably it. Really, I just love paragliding. So,
I think we're all a little bit nutter for sure.
Yeah.
Kirsty, I want to be mindful of your time here. I know it's getting a little bit later in your part of the world, but I'd love to ask you a few just kind of quick questions. You don't have to answer them quickly, but just kind of fire some random stuff at you here, and then
sure.
we'll wrap
I'll try
things
and
up.
not dive off at a tangent.
No, tangents are great. Dive as much as you want. So,
okay.
What's the funniest thing you've ever seen in flying? Recently,
the
ever?
Funniest thing.
Yeah, you're a Brit, and you all have great humor.
Yeah. Okay. I can think of something that's quite rude, actually. Not rude, but just unbelievable. Okay, which is the very first cat one I did was in Mexico, in vying, and that was my first cat one team comp. Russ was there, and there was another pilot. I don't know if you've ever met him, called Mark Heyman.
Yeah,
Mark. He's kind of retired from paragliding in these days, but he's such a character, and could be quite blokey, but just always happening stitches about everything. And we were stood in the queue. In Via, they used to have the Red Bull Arch, and you stood there waiting. And he's all kitted up, all you always look a bit like a trust chicken, aren't you, when you got your gear on and everything. And and they were quite particular. They're out checking your radio, and we're all like, So the last thing you want to do is when you're in that queue, and we've been queuing up for a while as well. The last thing you want to do is exit the queue. He's like, I need to go to the toilet. I was like, well, you have to go out the queue then, Mark. It's like, no. And he just literally went there and then in the queue. and I was like, oh my God, I cannot believe you just done that. But yeah. So
especially right in front of you.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic.
That was one, but that definitely comes to mind.
It's quite hard to hide. You're not exactly.
Yeah. But that was funny.
What would you like to see more of in our sport?
I would like to see more. I would love to see more. I mean, it's a classic. I'm bound to say this, but I would love to see more women competing. Yeah, I think actually I like the fact that we all compete together. There's not like in other sports like tennis where it's all all the women compete together and all the men compete together. I think having everyone competing together is a good thing. I think it actually, over the years, certainly when I first started doing Cat 1s and obviously flying, not just with a few other women, but with a lot of other people, obviously mainly men, helped me improve my skills hugely. So I actually quite like the fact that we're mixed in that sense. And I love the fact that in paragliding competitions, again, you're not flying in kind of like like a different leagues. You're actually all flying together in that competition as well, because then it's literally like me. When you first start doing a competition, it's like you might be there with someone like Kriegel or Russ or whoever who what other sports do you get to actually do that? You don't. But yeah, I think it would be lovely to have more women flying in the sport, especially in the UK. I mean, the depth of women competing in competitions in the UK is incredibly low. So yeah, it would be good for that to happen. Always get asked as to why there's less women flying, but that's a whole other conversation, really, I think.
Do you have I had a great conversation with Adele about this a few years back, and she had some great thoughts. Do you want to touch on that for a bit? It is?
Yeah, I can do. Yeah, it's something I've been asked lots of times, obviously, but why? I mean, I think at the end of the day, it sounds sort of glib almost to say it, but I think most women are operating in a completely different level of risk, really. So I think a lot of women don't get into the sport because just the act of paragliding in itself, it is considered too dangerous, I think, probably. I think there's an element of that. I think men typically are prepared to take a lot more risk, I think. I think their risk envelope is quite different. I think there's an element of that. But I think the women that do get into it, I mean, there's absolutely no reason really, apart from some of the physical constraints around wing sizes and stuff, there's absolutely no reason why women can't compete at the same level as men. But I think there's so few actually getting into the sport in the first place that it's hard for that to get translated into women doing big things in the sport.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's really proven itself out in the last few years as well. That you do have radically smaller numbers, and yet so you can't expect huge numbers at big comps. But you've seen Seiko and Lori, and in this world, Yael was 18th or 19th overall. I mean, she's tiny. And Lori and Yael were crushing in the X Alps. They both did. Which is an incredibly physical endeavor. Yeah. So it's
I was really impressed with the pair of them, to be honest. Yeah.
I mean, there's definitely this huge disadvantage with the weight thing, and with Bruce doing this weightless comps is, I think, an awesome idea, and I really hope that gets more teeth. But it becomes a lot more popular because there really truly is a massive disadvantage there that we don't need to get into. That's been documented a million times. But what's great about paragliding is it doesn't require much different physical ability at all.
It doesn't.
It's in
That's
the head,
right.
like you said.
That's right. Exactly.
It's a very finesse sport.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we can sort of compete together, really, because on a sort of purely physical level, other than having to sit under a smaller wing, there's nothing really going on that, you can't do as a woman, same as a man, really. You can all walk up a hill, you can all pull some strings, so... but it's just getting more women into it in the first place. I mean, other reasons, I don't know. I sometimes wonder if it's a social thing. I mean, I know flying in competitions in of itself is quite social, but the actual act in itself is quite lonely, almost, I suppose.
Sure.
I don't know whether that's part of it. It's not a team sport in that sense at all.
Right.
I mean, I know we talk about the team of the world, but when you're actually doing it, it's a solo effort, isn't it? Entirely. Sure. So I don't know whether that comes into it a bit as well. Sometimes, maybe.
Does your partner fly?
She has flown. She didn't fly before I met her. Emma didn't fly, and she felt compelled to have a go when we started going out. That wasn't from me. I really don't feel that your partner has to do what you do.
Sure.
At all. So, but she sort of under her own volition decided she wanted to have a go, and she did get qualified, but she never got the bug. She never really got bitten by it. Felt that she absolutely wanted to do. And I do think that actually, I think probably with Emma as well, I think it's to a degree, it's that whole, not that it's a lonely sport, but you have to be very self-confident, I think, with it actually. And I coming back to that whole thing about mental side of things as well, I think I noticed that even in myself sometimes, it's quite a thing to go onto a hill and set up all your kit, which again, you're doing on your own, essentially, making sure all of your stuff is going to work for you. There's no one else to check it really as such. And then getting into the air and then making all your own decisions about what you're going to do, it's quite a thing in a way. And I think that's not for everyone, is it? So
how do the two of you handle your obsession? How does that work in a relationship? That's a question I get from a lot of people.
It's a
how do you
testing
navigate
one, isn't it?
this? Yeah, it's tough.
I mean,
like you said, it takes a lot of time.
It does. We talked about it earlier on a bit, and it's definitely use that phrase, a bone of contention. But I think it is to a degree. It is a selfish sport, especially when you've got a young family. To say, do you mind if I just sort of disappear for the day? You can look after Noah. I'm just gone. I mean, that's So and Emma's got her interests as well, obviously, but not ones that take up that degree of, it's a bit like if you play tennis, you might say, well, can I just go and play tennis for a couple of hours? That's very different to saying,
right,
I'm going to go.
I'm going to Colombia for 10 days.
I'm going to, or actually, I want to go on a holiday. I want to go on a holiday for 2.5 weeks.
Without you.
Which is is that okay? So it is, it does come into play. Of course it does. And as much as I still do it, I am conscious of the fact that it's a bit one-sided in that respect. So
let's end on this last one, and you've kind of answered this, but I think it's still be an interesting one to ask you. Does free flight make other aspects of your life better or worse?
Oh, that's an interesting question. It really, really is. Does it make? I think. Well, we touched on it earlier on. I think in some aspects it's made it worse. I think in terms of friendships and so on, I definitely pushed some friendships over the edge in terms of them not happening. Or I probably would have had more probably more friendships outside of flying. A lot of my friendships are in flying for obvious reasons, really. But I think overall, I just can't ever imagine it not having been a major part of a lot of my life. It just is me, really. I can't think of anything better to do than paragliding, really. But, I've done other sports as well, but none of them have quite hooked me the way that paragliding has. Because again, to use that, it sounds a bit glib again, but it is Leonardo da Vinci's dream, isn't it? Literally. Can you imagine when he was several hundred years ago, he kind of thought about these concepts, like the idea that we can now do it in a way that's even more incredible than he even sort of imagined, really.
Yeah.
It's insane. Like on these new gliders now, you can literally get hold of the lower line set, and sort of in one thing. It's it's like nothing there, is there? It's like literally nothing, and that holds you up and hold all that G, and all of your weight, and that's pretty amazing technology, really. That can do that, and you can fly hundreds of kilometers like that, and then put it back in a bag and get on a train or get in a car.
It is a magic carpet. Really. It is a magic carpet.
Yeah.
Kirsty, what a joy! I've been smiling for an hour and a half, and my face is getting exhausted. I'm smiling so much.
Well, it's just been a nice chat.
Yeah. It's great to connect with you, and next time we'll have to do this in person in World Neo or someplace where we find our place and find ourselves in the world. But thanks for sharing your thoughts and time, and good luck raising the little one. That's quite an awesome
really good
journey.
To hear your voice, and like you say, hopefully we can meet up in person again soon.
Sounds great. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Wonderful. Thank you.
If you find the Cloud-Based Mayhem valuable, you can support it in a lot of different ways. You can give us a rating on iTunes or Stitcher, or however you get your podcast. That goes a long ways and helps spread the word. You can blog about it on your own website or share it on social media. You can talk about it on the way up to launch with your pilot friends. I know a lot of interesting conversations have happened that way. And of course, you can support us financially. This show does take a lot of time, a lot of editing, a lot of storage and music and all kinds of behind the scenes cost. So if you can support us financially, all we've ever asked for is $1 a show. And you can do that through a one-time donation through PayPal, or you can set up a subscription service that charges you for each show that comes out. We put a new show out every 2 weeks. So for example, if you did $1 a show and every 2 weeks, it'd be about $25 a year. So way cheaper than a magazine subscription, and it makes all of this possible. I do not want to fund this show with advertising or sponsors. We get asked about that pretty frequently, but for a whole bunch of different reasons, which I've said many times on the show, I don't want to do that. I don't like having that stuff at the front of the show. And I also want you to know that these are authentic conversations with real people, and these are just our opinions, but our opinions are not being skewed by sponsors or advertising dollars. I think that's a pretty toxic business model. So I hope you dig that. You can support us. If you go to cloudbasedmayhem.com, you can find the places to support. You can do it through patreon.com/cloudbasedmayhem. If you want a recurring subscription, you can also do that directly through the website. We've tried to make it really easy, and that will give you access to all the bonus material, little video casts that we do, and extra little nuggets that we find in conversations that don't make it into the main show, but we feel like you should hear. We don't put any of that behind a paywall. If you can't afford to support us, then just let me know and I'll set you up with an account. Of course, that'll be lifetime, and hopefully you're being in a position someday to be able to support us. But you'll find all that on the website. All of you who have supported us or even joined our newsletter or bought Cloud-Based Mayhem merchandise, t-shirts or hats or anything, you should be all set up. You should have an account and you should be able to access all that bonus material now. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate your support, and we'll see you on the next show. Thank you.